Welcome to New Possibilities. I speak truth to power without fear. So yesterday I listened to the Derek Chauvin trial, and I want to share some excerpts from that trial and also provide my commentary. Before I get into it, I want to encourage people to subscribe to this channel if you're not already subscribed, to like the video, and to watch the live stream until the end. Also, I want to encourage you, if you are interested in art, I encourage you to follow my art page on Instagram at the Asaka Gallery, and there's an underscore between each word in that, and Asaka is spelled A-S-A-K-A. I plan to have an art exhibit dealing with police brutality. It will be a visual artist protest against police brutality. It will be at the Mansion at the Great Blacks in Wax Museum in Baltimore, Maryland on October 9th at 3 p.m. I will post the link to the invite. All are welcome, so I encourage you to RSVP as soon as possible and to save the date. Again, I also want to encourage you all to follow me on Twitter at NewPosBlog. So let's get right into it. You know, yesterday was a day of some powerful testimony in this case. And as people know, former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin is on trial for murdering George Floyd. Derek Chauvin kept his knee on the brother George Floyd's neck for over 9 minutes, actually 9 minutes and 29 seconds. And despite the pleas from the brother George Floyd was talking about how he couldn't breathe. He was talking about how he had all this pain. And despite that, he even cried out for his mother. You know, despite those pleas and cries and saying that he can't breathe, that pig police officer kept his knee on his brother's neck, and the brother died. Even though the audience, the people, the bystanders, were also crying out to this officer, asking him to let off of his brother's neck. This officer ignored those pleas and let this brother die. Even after the brother was unconscious, this pig cop kept his knee on his brother's neck. So yesterday was another day of testimony in the trial. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to play some excerpts from some of the testimony. And after I do so, I'm going to provide my commentary. So let me share my screen. Okay, so one of the most compelling parts of this whole thing was when this teenager testified. You know, she testified about what she saw and about the impact that it had on her. You know, and one of the things that she said that was most powerful, and I'm not going to, let's see if I can, yeah, I'm going to play an excerpt from you instead of reading it. So hopefully you all are able to hear.
Only 9% of
so they have these commercials, so please bear with me. Sorry, you got to listen to this commercial.
Pounds of it enters the ocean every year. Grovco plastic-free household cleaners are designed to keep your home clean and solve the single-use plastic problem. Sustainably powerful for a healthy home and planet. Choose your free starter set today.
Mr. Nelson asked you a few questions about your video going viral and how that's changed your life. Remember that at the end?
Yes.
Would you tell the ladies and gentlemen how your viewing, experiencing what happened to George Floyd has affected your life?
When I look at George Floyd, I look at my dad, I look at my brothers, I look at my cousins, my uncles, because they are all Black. I have a black father. I have a black brother. I have black friends. And I look at that and I look at how that could have been one of them. It's been nights. I stayed up apologizing and apologizing to George Floyd for not doing more and not physically interacting and not saving his life. But it's like, it's not what I should have done. It's what he should have done. He should have. That's the answer.
Okay, so you heard that testimony. I mean, when she talked about how when she sees George Floyd, she sees her father, she sees her cousins, her uncles, because they're all black men. I mean, that was a powerful point in this testimony. I mean, it just brings home like the real impact that this whole situation had on all the people witnessing it. You know, we see ourselves in George Floyd. We see our family members in George Floyd. You know, and it's just a horrible tragedy that a young person would have to witness a police officer kill a black man right in front of her. And every time we see that video played over and over again, it's like we relive the trauma, even for those of us who weren't there. You know, by watching the video, it's as if we are there. And it's a form of terrorism. You know, it's a form, these images of these police killing our people is a form of terrorism. It traumatizes us and we suffer all this damage, psychological damage and psychological terrorism. So the other thing is just her feeling helpless, like her feeling about, you know, this need to apologize, like she wants to apologize for not doing enough to save his life. Because you had all of these people surrounding this cop and they weren't in a position to save his brother's life because that officer had a badge. You know, having a badge, he was operating under the color of law, which literally gives him a license to deprive people of their liberty, to deprive people of their life, and to harm people. So people, even though they wanted to do something, even though this young woman wanted to do something, young girl wanted to do something, she couldn't do anything because this pig had the power of the law behind him. And it's just a shame. It's just a shame that they had to just witness and this cop, and well, actually officers, because it was two other officers holding them down as well. They had to sit there and witness this, like witnessing a lynching and not being able to do anything to stop it. So I just thought that that was a powerful segment in this testimony. And then also there was another young girl, and I'm not going to play her testimony or anything like that. I'll just talk about it. She just talked about how she felt sad and bad about what happened. Like, you know, a young girl, I think she was like 8 or 9 or something. Well, I think she was like in the 3rd grade or something like that. Very young, actually in the presence of this murder, actually witnessed a cop murder someone. And let me see if they have any information about what she had to say, what the little one had to say. No, they don't have it here, but it was just heart-wrenching to hear, you know, these two young girls talk about what they witnessed that day. And another compelling part of the testimony of yesterday was the brother Donald Williams. He's a MMA fighter, like he's somebody that specializes in martial arts. I mentioned him in the last video I did the other day about the testimony on the first day of trial. This brother was one of the people who was there and witnessed, you know, this officer, Derek Chauvin, murder George Floyd. And as he was witnessing this, he was, you know, crying out to these cops to stop it. And then he called the officer a bum and all that kind of stuff, and rightfully so. And I understand his rage. But during this this trial, the defense attorney tried to paint him as the typical angry black man and tried to diminish, what this brother was saying. And this brother stood his ground. And what I'm going to do is play, a couple of excerpts right here from this article. And I will post these articles in the description box so that you all can check them out for yourself and listen to the videos yourself. But let's play this. There are like at least 2 clips that I want to play from this. And I'm sorry I'm rushing. I have to get to work soon, so just bear with me. I'll start with the other one. Let me try this again. Hopefully it'll work. I don't know why it's acting up. All right, so I'm gonna go to the second one. And the second one is him listening to the 911 call that he made. And that's one of the things that's so crazy about this situation. Here you have a scene where they're like 4 officers on the scene, but these officers are participating in the murder of George Floyd. So many of the people on the scene ended up calling the police on the police. As I said before, a situation is horrible when you end up having to call the police on the police, calling the police to stop the police. And it just speaks to the dilemma that black people are in. Like, who do we reach out to when the police, who are supposed to protect and serve, are the ones taking people's lives, when the police are the ones violating the law and oppressing the people? You can't run to your oppressor and ask your oppressor to end the oppression. And that's the dilemma that they were in. They were running to the very people, the very institution that was responsible for the killing of this brother. So let me see if this audio works. So let me play this. This is the 911 call.
I've reached the city of Minneapolis to reach someone in our property crimes division.
Y'all murderers, bro. Y'all murderers, dog. You gonna kill yourself. I already know it. 2 more years. You gonna shoot yourself. Murderers, bro. Y'all niggas is murderers, bro. Can you have a separation?
Yes, dispatch.
Yeah, man. So I want to see the supervisor. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, he wants to speak with the supervisor related to 320 call. For 233, 46, May 25, 2020. I've reached the city of Minneapolis to reach someone in our property crimes division.
Y'all murderers, bro. Y'all murderers, dog. You gonna kill yourself. I already know it. 2 more years. You gonna shoot.
So let me play this other clip.
Do you recall saying, "I dare you to touch me like that? I swear I'll slap the fuck out of both of you"?
Yeah, I did.
So again, sir, it's fair to say that you grew angrier and angrier.
No, I grew professional. I stayed in my body. You can't pay me out to be angry.
Do you recall saying, "I dare"?
Okay. So let me try to play this first clip again. Let me see if I reloaded it. Hold on 1 second.
That is correct. I did call the police on the police.
And why did you do that?
Because I believe I witnessed a murder.
And so you felt the need to call the police.
I felt the need to call the police on the police.
Now, there were police there, right?
There were police there.
Why didn't you just talk to them about it?
believe that we just didn't have no connection. You know, I spoke to them, but not on a connection of a human being relationship. That is correct. I did call the police.
Okay, so there you heard it. You know, they were just trying to paint his brother as just some angry brother, and he was basically saying, you know, that these police were participating in a murder. They were protecting this guy, and he didn't have any kind of connection with these police because they were ignoring the pleas and the cries of the audience, of the people, the bystanders and stuff like that. So he had no reason to have faith that they would do anything to stop Officer Chauvin from killing his brother. So let me go to this last segment, and that's the EMS work. And before I do that, I want to go back to this. Like, as this brother was listening to the audio of his 911 call, and they didn't really play it, like that little video clip didn't really play the audio of that, you know, the complete audio of that call, but he was talking to the office, you know, the 911 operator about what was happening. And while he was listening to it on the stand, he proceeded to wipe his eyes, as you see in this picture right here. Like, it moved, like this is a traumatic experience. So like, even though this is a strong brother, you know, somebody that's a professional fighter and all that kind of stuff, you know, somebody that represents masculinity, even this call, like the memories that he was reliving by talking about this stuff and by hearing his actual call to the 911 operator, it moved him to the point where he was crying. And just like, as I'm listening to all this testimony, all I keep thinking is they better not let Derek Chauvin get away with murdering his brother George Floyd. You know, and that whole situation, you know, as many people have even said in the media, just reminds me of when those cops got off in Los Angeles for beating Rodney King like a slave. You know, many of us, like back in the day, I'm sure a lot of you weren't even born at that time. You know, a lot of the young people weren't born at that time. But that was one of the first cases where we had video evidence of police brutality captured. And everybody assumed that, oh, this is, you know, those cops are done. They're going to go to jail for doing this, for beating this brother senseless. And all of those cops walked. So, of course, people were outraged, and they literally set Los Angeles on fire. And I understand the rage. And I think that rage will be magnified. And there were protests around the country as well. I think that rage will be magnified in this case, because this is one of the most horrific things that we have ever seen. Like a brother crying out for his mother, a brother talking about how he's done and how he's going. He was basically prophesizing his own death. Like, he saw that this officer wasn't letting up, and he's crying out. Like, that is like literally a lynching, just like the Eric Garner case. Like, Black people cannot endure any more of this stuff. We're not going to sit by and allow this stuff to continue. You know, people are not going to sit by and passively allow this stuff to continue and just be content with marches and prayers and all that kind of stuff, and talks and videos. People are going to take to the streets. So I hope and I pray that there's justice in this case, man. So let me go to this next clip. And what I'm going to do, let's see. Let me see if the clip is here. Let's see. That's a 10-minute clip. Yeah, so I'm going to go ahead and just play this clip.
He was not moving. His face was, the first thing that concerned me is his face was like smushed into the ground, swollen appearing.
So I'm just going to say this before I continue. Like, this woman, you know, is a EMS type of worker, and she just happened to be on the scene. Like she wasn't there in her official capacity. From what I understand, she was just another bystander, but she happened to be like an EMS worker and stuff like that. And she tried to help George Floyd. She tried to, ask them to let off of him and to help him and all that kind of stuff because she's skilled in this area, but they didn't allow her to do so. So let me finish playing the audio for you.
And, at that point, are you acting a little bit as Genevieve Hanson, EMT?
I identified myself right away because I noticed that he needed medical attention. It didn't take me long to realize that he had an altered level of consciousness, and in our training, that is the first sign that somebody needs medical attention. So my attention moved from Mr. Floyd to how can I gain access to this patient and give him medical attention or direct the officers. And I didn't pay much attention to George Floyd after that.
So when you first got there and you saw Mr. Floyd on the ground, you mentioned about seeing his face, correct?
Correct.
And incidentally, I think in a subsequent interview, you had talked about Mr. Floyd's face facing towards the speedway, correct?
Correct. Which is just what my memory did, but we know that's not right.
And now as you sit here today, do you remember seeing his face when you were around in the squad car side of him?
Yes.
And so, in terms of his face when you're first there, or even the rest of him, what is it that you saw that made you concerned about his medical needs?
I was really concerned about. I thought his face looked puffy and swollen, which would happen if you were putting a grown man's weight on someone's neck. I noticed some fluid coming from what looked like George Floyd's body, and in a lot of cases, we see a patient release their bladder when they die. I can't tell you exactly where the fluid was coming from, but that's where my mind went. He wasn't moving. He was being restrained, but he wasn't moving.
When you first arrived, was he vocalizing at all? Was he speaking at all?
I don't remember.
And earlier you used the term altered consciousness. Yes?
Yes.
And what do you mean by that? What did you see in terms of his consciousness?
Well, we when we're assessing on a level of consciousness on a call, we will often first try to just talk to the patient and see if they respond. And if we don't get a response, we'll often kind of tap them on the shoulder or apply sort of painful stimuli. And often I would do a sternal rub or, press their fingernail very hard. And if they respond to that, we know that, we can assess their level of consciousness based on that. When somebody's laying on your, or, leaning into your neck, that's painful stimuli.
So
I could tell that from the side.
tell what?
That he had an altered level of consciousness to the point that he wasn't responding to painful stimuli.
You mentioned that Mr. Chauvin had a knee on Mr. Floyd's neck.
Correct.
Did you see where his other leg was?
I don't remember anymore, but I think I may have said something about it in previous.
Did you think it was on Mr. Floyd's back?
I don't know.
Okay. And in that moment, when you first arrived and observed what you could about Mr. Floyd, what did you think you needed to do?
I think I had already assessed that he had an altered level of consciousness. What I needed to know is whether or not he had a pulse anymore.
And, you know, I mean, you gotta give just a little bit here, but did you try and assess, you know, how much weight Mr. Chauvin was putting on George Floyd?
I mean, I didn't try to. I recognized that it was an issue right away because he seemed very comfortable. With
Who's he?
Officer Chauvin seemed very comfortable with the majority of his weight balanced on top of Mr. Floyd's neck. In my memory, he had his hand in his pocket. He looked so comfortable.
And if his hand wasn't actually in his pocket, would that change anything that you assessed at the time?
I suppose not. He was comfortable in the position that he was in.
So if his hand, instead of being in his pocket, was simply resting on his thigh, would that change any of your assessment?
He wasn't distributing the weight out and on the car, on the pavement.
When you first approached, you said you identified yourself as a firefighter.
Correct.
To whom did you identify yourself?
To Officer Tao, controlling the scene. I spoke loudly enough that I would think that the other three officers would have been able to hear me throughout the event.
We know you weren't. Well, let me ask you this way: how did Officer Tao respond?
He said something along the lines of, "If you really
So I misspoke. She's a firefighter.
are a Minneapolis firefighter, you would know better than to get involved."
What did you think of that?
First, I was worried that he wasn't going to believe me and not let me help. And I also, that's not right. I mean, that's exactly what I should have done. There was no medical assistance on scene, and I got there and I could have given medical assistance. That's exactly what I should have done.
So based on your training and experience and what you had seen, what did you want to do for this person on the ground?
Had they let me into the scene, I already had decided what his level of consciousness was, so I would have requested additional help. I would have wanted someone to call 911 for the paramedics and fire to come. I would have asked someone to run to the gas station and look for an AED. And I would have checked his airway. I would have been worried about his spinal cord injury because he had so much weight on his neck. I would have opened his airway to check if there were any obstructions. And I would have checked for a pulse. And when I didn't find a pulse, if that was the case, I would have started compressions. And I didn't have my med bag, so I would have continued compressions. We don't give mouth to mouth anymore. So I would have continued compressions at a rate of 100 a minute until help arrived.
And by compressions, what do you mean?
I would have put my hands, stuck my hands and pressed his chest.
Chest compressions.
Chest compressions.
Yep.
Yeah.
And what's the point of doing chest compressions?
Pumping the blood for somebody that's not doing that themselves, trying to get a pulse back.
And were you able to do that, any of those steps?
No.
Why weren't you able to do any of that?
Because the officers didn't let me into the scene. I also offered, in my memory, to walk them through it or told them, if he doesn't have a pulse, you need to start compressions. And that wasn't done either.
And so are these things that you wanted?
Okay, so I'm going to stop right there. I want to thank you all for tuning in. So the biggest thing about her testimony is that here you have someone that's a firefighter, somebody that's trained in how to resuscitate people and to assist people who are dealing with a medical emergency. This woman offered her services. She offered to intervene to help George Floyd. He was unconscious, and you still had this police officer with his knee in the brother's neck. So she wanted to help, and the officers refused to allow her to help, to intervene in the scene. Also, they did not want to take the advice that she was providing. She was willing to walk them through the process so that they could do it themselves and apply these compressions and all that kind of stuff, but they refused to do so. They basically let this brother die. And, you know, I know that they have testified that there was, you know, they're claiming that they had already contacted the, you know, emergency personnel and stuff like that, but you had somebody right there on the scene that could have intervened earlier, and perhaps the brother's life may have been saved. She wanted to take his pulse and all that kind of stuff. She wanted to try to resuscitate him, but these officers refused to allow her to do so, and they basically participated in the murder of this brother. And, you know, it's just despicable that that would happen. It's despicable that here you have somebody that's trained to save lives being denied the opportunity to save George Floyd's life. So I want to thank you all for tuning in. Shout out to Psycho. Thanks for tuning in. Shout out to Mr. Untouchable. Shout out to DOD. Shout out to John Pro. And shout out to everybody that's watching this on the playback. So let me see if there's anything that I want to respond to before I go. I'm really got to get to work. Just bear with me. I'm looking at this comment. Yeah, I feel you, DOD. I feel you for real. John Pro, let me post. Well, I'm going to say, you know, what some of the people pointed out. John Pro said that if Chauvin gets off, the entire country will be on fire. And DOD talked about burn Minneapolis to the ground if he gets off. I can't see him getting off, but we've seen this story before, like where all the evidence was there and police got away with it. Again, Eric Garner, we saw that brother get lynched live on camera, choked all the way out live on camera, and no charges were brought against those officers. We've seen this before. You know, we remember Trayvon Martin. That brother was shot through the heart and left to die after being hunted by George Zimmerman. And the jury let George Zimmerman walk. George Zimmerman is out there living his best life, you know, capitalizing off of the death of Trayvon Martin, getting famous off the death of Trayvon Martin, selling paintings and signing autographs off the death of Trayvon Martin. So we've seen this stuff before. We saw what happened to Michael Brown. Michael Brown getting shot and killed, and his body left in the middle of the street for hours upon hours for many bystanders to witness that, to see that brother's body laying on the ground in the street like roadkill. Roadkill is treated better than Black people. And, you know, as someone had pointed out before, like, if someone were to film themselves putting their knee on a dog, there would be public outrage. That person who would do something like that and kill a dog, they will be locked up. There will be universal condemnation and outrage. But when it comes to a Black man, there's all kinds of excuses. When it comes to a Black man, all of a sudden there's some hard case to figure out. All of a sudden, it's some difficult case that can go one way or the other. That's just the way it works. So with that, I'm going to say peace and blessings to each and every one of you. Again, I want to thank you all for tuning in. And hopefully I'll be able to follow the trial today, depending on my workload. Please rate, comment, subscribe, like the video, share the video, hit that notification bell so that you'll know when I post new content on here. Peace and blessings. Have a great day.